Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. China closed out 2025 claiming a clean hit on its 5% GDP growth target. On paper, mission accomplished. In reality, this thing was dragged across the finish line by exports doing Olympic-level heavy lifting, while the domestic economy jogged behind with a limp. Fourth quarter growth slowed to about 4.5%, the weakest pace in roughly 3 years. And that slowdown matters because it tells you where the momentum is actually going. Industrial production kept humming, but consumers stayed cautious, investment kept sliding, and real estate continued to act like a gravity well, pulling everything down with it. The export story is the core of this. China posted a record trade surplus, roughly $1.2 trillion, bigger than anything the world has ever seen. Exports to the U.S. dropped hard, down about 20% thanks to tariffs and political friction, but Beijing and Chinese manufacturers just pivoted. Europe, Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, those markets soaked up the excess supply. It's the economic version of getting kicked out of one bar and immediately opening tabs at 5 others. Effective in the short term, but it creates problems fast when everyone realizes you're undercutting prices to keep the party going. Back at home, the numbers are way less flattering. Retail sales growth slowed to under 1% in December, the weakest since China reopened after COVID. Fixed asset investment fell outright for the year, the first annual decline since the data series began in the 1990s. Property investment collapsed more than 17%. New home prices are still falling, and that matters because real estate used to account for about a quarter of China's entire economy. When housing goes bad in China, it's not just a sector. It's household wealth, local government revenue, and consumer confidence all taking hits at once. Layered on top of that is the demographic situation, which keeps getting worse. China recorded just 7.9 million births in 2025, the lowest number since records began in 1949. The population shrank for a fourth straight year, down about 3.4 million people. Beijing has thrown incentives at this. Childcare subsidies, messaging campaigns, social nudges, but the reality is younger Chinese aren't buying what the government is selling. High housing costs, job insecurity, and a weak social safety net are killing birth rates. And that's not a problem you fix with a stimulus package or a catchy slogan. Policy-wise, Beijing is trying to thread a needle. There's been targeted monetary easing, rate cuts for certain sectors, a new trillion yuan credit program aimed at private firms, extensions of consumer subsidy programs, but no big bazooka. Once the 5% growth target was secured, policymakers clearly backed off, almost like they were saving ammo for later. The official line is strong supply, weak demand, and that's accurate, but it's also an admission that the engine driving growth isn't the one you want powering a major economy long term. While all of that is happening domestically, Beijing hasn't taken its foot off the gas externally, especially around Taiwan. Early this week, a Chinese surveillance drone crossed into the territorial airspace of the Pratas Islands, controlled by Taiwan. It stayed just outside the effective range of Taiwan's air defense systems, got warned over international radio, and then left. Textbook gray zone behavior. No shots fired, no dramatic escalation, but it tests responses, establishes patterns, and slowly shifts what feels normal. This wasn't an isolated move. Analysts in Taiwan describe it as part of a broader salami slicing campaign, integrating drones, Coast Guard ships, maritime militia, and even research vessels to apply pressure without crossing clear red lines. The goal is steady, incremental control. Challenge Taiwan's ability to resupply and administer outlying islands, compress its defensive depth, and shape the environment for a potential blockade scenario down the road. It's the geopolitical equivalent of boiling the frog, and Beijing has been perfecting this technique for years. At the same time, the PLA made sure to loudly announce it tracked U.S. naval transits through the Taiwan Strait. 2 American vessels, the USS John Finn and the USNS Mary Sears, passed through, and China responded with the usual combination of shadowing, surveillance, and stern language about sovereignty and security. This has become routine, but routine doesn't mean meaningless. Each transit reinforces U.S. presence. Each PLA response reinforces Beijing's claim that it's watching every move. Pressure on Taiwan isn't just military. There's also a steady drip of intelligence and influence operations. Taiwanese authorities detained a television reporter and several active duty and retired military personnel accused of passing military information to Chinese contacts in exchange for cash. The amounts weren't huge, thousands to tens of thousands of new Taiwan dollars, but the access mattered. What made this case stand out is the media angle. Journalists aren't just about information leaks, they shape narratives. From Beijing's perspective, that's gold. You don't need someone screaming propaganda if you can subtly influence what gets covered, how it's framed, and what quietly gets ignored. Zooming out to Europe, there's been noise about China building a massive new embassy complex in London. Politicians are worked up about it, but intelligence professionals are noticeably calmer. The assessment from inside the security world is that embassies aren't where the most serious espionage happens anymore. Cyber operations, remote influence campaigns, and digital surveillance matter far more. If anything, consolidating diplomatic staff into one location makes monitoring easier, not harder. It's a reminder that a lot of modern intelligence work doesn't look like Cold War spy movies, and definitely not like the old Soviet playbook. Speaking of non-traditional battlegrounds, China is also pushing hard on the financial front. With political turbulence swirling around the U.S. Federal Reserve, Beijing is continuing its slow, methodical push to expand the global use of the yuan. About half of China's cross-border transactions are now settled in its own currency. Its alternative payment system, CIPS, has grown significantly since Russia got cut off from much of the Western financial system after invading Ukraine. This isn't about replacing the dollar tomorrow. Capital controls still make that impossible. It's about carving out space, especially among sanctioned states and developing economies, where reliance on the dollar becomes optional. On the military technology side, China keeps adjusting based on what it's seeing in modern conflicts. New imagery shows an upgraded version of the ZBD-04 infantry fighting vehicle with an unmanned turret, ditching the old 100mm gun. That reduces internal ammunition storage and improves survivability against drones and top attack weapons. It's a quiet but telling shift, suggesting the PLA is paying attention to how armored vehicles are getting shredded in Ukraine and elsewhere. China's defense exports are also rolling on. Uzbekistan is now evaluating a Chinese-made VN-22 wheeled armored vehicle, continuing a trend of Chinese systems showing up across Central Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. These platforms are relatively affordable, modular, and politically easier to buy than Western equivalents. Every sale deepens defense ties and normalizes Chinese military hardware abroad. And then there's the wildcard stuff. Chinese military researchers disclosed they're testing more than 10 quantum-based cyber warfare tools, with some already used in frontline scenarios. The claims are big: rapid data processing, improved detection of stealth platforms. And while it's hard to separate hype from reality, the direction is clear. Beijing wants asymmetric advantages, especially in domains where rules are fuzzy and escalation is hard to define. Internally, the Communist Party is still grinding through its anti-corruption campaign. Leadership meetings this month emphasized rooting out two-faced officials, basically loyalty enforcement dressed up as discipline. The number of senior officials taken down keeps rising year over year, including people promoted under the current leadership. A high-profile banking case involving tens of millions of yuan in hidden corruption underscores that financial institutions remain a mess beneath the surface. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of the RH community. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribing, leaving a quick 5-star review, or sharing it with someone you know makes a huge difference. It's how this network will grow.